Okay, so the next aspect we're going to talk about is color profiles and printer profiles. The reason this is important is it's about making the colors of an image look as we expect them to. Now, this is quite a dangerous topic. In my experience, there's quite a lot of bad information online about this. In particular, one of the highest ranking articles on color spaces on Google is actually just like largely false. So be careful. It is also quite a technical area. A color profile is a set of data that tells your device, like the camera, your monitor, or your printer, how to interpret and display the color data accurately. It ensures that what you see on the screen and eventually in print matches the original colors of your image as closely as possible. Think of the color profile as the standard. Without them, we could never achieve consistency. You might have heard of a company called Pantone. Pantone, what they do, they maintain exact pigments of different colors. For example, they manage like Coca-Cola's red to make sure that that color is always the same consistent red. Color profiles are doing that same kind of thing, but in the digital color space. Why this is really important is obviously like to bring Coke back again. When you see that color red, it's been marketed and branded so well over time. Even without the logo, we still think of Coke. So it's vital for them to make sure that that color is correct every single time. And it's the same thing with our imagery. If we've picked a specific color palette because it conveys a certain amount of emotion, or if we're working for a client who needs to make sure that its colors match online what they look like in reality, we need to make sure that that standard is set. And that's why we have color profiles. So we'll have a look at the most common color profiles or color spaces even. First profile and the most common profile that you're going to be dealing with on the web and in social media is sRGB. This is the most universal and it's just ideal for online use. You want to make sure your images are exported in sRGB. Then there's Adobe RGB. Adobe RGB is again similar to sRGB, but it has a much larger amount of colors in there. But the only issue with Adobe RGB is that it's not necessarily supported and displayed well online because most screens aren't actually capable of showing all of the colors that Adobe RGB has to offer. Then there's ProPhoto RGB. It's quite similar to Adobe RGB in that it's a very large color space. It's largely used for editing raw imagery. And then finally, the CMYK. And CMYK is best for commercial printing. And it's used for printers. It's not really for screen use, but often we do export into CMYK. So digitally, there's two main color spaces that we're going to be dealing with as a photographer. That's Adobe RGB and sRGB. Now, your camera can shoot in either of those two, Adobe RGB or sRGB. If we make the camera shoot in sRGB, it captures a lot less color data and therefore dynamic range in our images. Now, even if we're shooting raw, but if we've captured the image in sRGB, when we come to edit it, there's just less data there available to us. So we always want to capture our imagery in Adobe RGB color space, bring it into the editor, edit it in Adobe RGB because it gives us a lot more color and dynamic range to choose from. And then at the end, we export in sRGB. Now, I know it seems like, well, what's the point? Why do I need that Adobe RGB if I'm just going to export in sRGB? It's because it gives you just more accuracy in the edit. It's like when we were discussing using the RAW file format over just a PNG format for editing imagery. Now, when we're exporting for print, the color space we're going to use is probably going to be Adobe RGB. It gets a bit more complicated. It could be CMYK, but this really depends on like what printer you're going to be using. I would contact the printer that you're going to be using and ask them to help you through this process because it can be different depending on the printers. We'll go into that a bit deeper further on. So here's the big problem is, so if we export our images in the wrong color profile, they're just going to display incorrectly. On top of that, if we're editing our imagery on a inaccurate monitor, our perception of how the colors are going to look versus the standard is going to be off. So when we export them, when they go out to the client, for example, or they're displayed on the website, they can end up looking very different than we hoped or expected. So if you're really serious about this, the professional standard, you do need a color accurate monitor. Now, most of Macs are color accurate, but on top of that, you then need a color calibration tool. Now, I'm not going to go into too much detail. You can look this up yourself because it is a bit niche. But if you're working at a professional commercial level, you do need these tools. So one thing we can do to make sure that our colors are accurate is something called proofing. If you have a color accurate monitor, it shows you what the image is going to look like after it's been exported. So when we're looking at the image in our editing software, it'll be showing it you in the Adobe RGB color space if you've done this properly, And when we're editing it, when we edit it, we edit to our eye, what we expect. Capture One, Lightroom, and Photoshop all offer you the opportunity to proof your image. I'm not going to show you how to do it in all of them. You can look that up. It's not very complicated. What you want to do, if you know you're going to export it for screens, you're going to export into sRGB. So you want to proof the imagery in sRGB.